Lily from Miami.
Lily, great to see you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Oh, hi, Kim. Good to see you, girls. I feel like we should be out in the boat together.
Well, that's where we're going.
Oh, cool.
Want to take a ferry ride? Let's take a ferry ride together.
Here we go.
Here we go. Turn this baby off. Oh, it's gonna keep ringing. Okay.
Hey, Carol, Sharon here.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks for
I
joining.
gotta grab my punch. I need my punch.
Okay, everybody, welcome aboard the Prenton Island Ferry. I'm Captain Liz Bayless, temporarily subbing for James and Courtney at the helm of the Homer S. Morgan. I'll be your captain for the journey to and from Prenton Island tonight. Before we leave the dock, we will start with a short safety briefing and a few of the ground rules. We have a very, very full boat tonight, so we'll need your help to have a smooth ride. So please keep yourself muted. Let's see how you guys do with that. Keep yourself muted, and then turn your video off so we can save the bandwidth for Carol and for the visuals we'll be showing. You'll probably want to have your Zoom on speaker view, which should be the default setting. It's great because then the visuals will be in the middle, the speaker will be up on the right, or it'll just be the speaker and you won't see the big gallery, which once we turn all our videos off will just be names. So this will show the speaker and as well as the beautiful screen shares of the passing scenery. So we'll be underway for about an hour. And if you have to leave early, we understand, that's okay. Just mind your step as you depart because we'll still be at sea and it might be a little wet. So, and a special reminder for Carol, please remember to breathe and to speak slowly.
And with that, I would like to welcome you all and toast in the screen to officially launch Ferry to Cooperation Island. And thanks to Captain Liz for getting us started. So cheers, everyone.
Hooray!
Yay. Cheers.
Cheers, cheers, Carol, and congratulations on the launch. Now that we're underway, I'll pass the mic to Kim Carans to give us an overview of what's going to happen this evening.
Hey everybody, again, I'm Kim, also known as Carol's Snipe Crew. Sailing with Carol means that I get to spend a lot of time with her both on and off the water at regattas where we work as a team to sail fast and smart. It also means that there's a lot of time talking about boats and rigging and sail choice and rig setting and stuff. But that doesn't take up all the time. There's some gap time, and it also means we have a lot of time for conversation about fun stuff like books. We both love reading and writing. She's in Rhode Island, I'm in Maryland, and when we get together to sail at regattas or practices, we often do a great book exchange where she shares what she's read, I share what I've read, and we go home with new books to read, which is also super fun. It also means that a lot of times either in the boat park or on the ride, sail out to the race course or back in sometimes, although back in we're usually debriefing about the day's events. But we get in some great conversation about books. What are you reading now? What do you really enjoy? So I was really super lucky over the past couple of years that I got to read a couple early drafts of Ferry to Cooperation Island in progress. So we had some great conversations about characters. I said, well, you know, how did so-and-so meet so-and-so? And it was really neat to talk stuff through. So I can tell you, if the book has just landed in your mailbox or in your inbox as an audio book or an ebook, you're in for a super treat and a great adventure. So tonight, Carol and I, the goal is we're going to kick things off by, we're going to have a little conversation as if we're on our way out to the race course, talking about books, much like we always do. In the back end of things, Liz is going to be doing some cat herding to sort through any questions that may arise. So you can, after Carol and I do some Q&A, we're going to share some time with the whole group. And if you have a question while Carol and I are chatting, feel free to pop it in via the chat feature and it'll get in the queue. Or as we transition to Q&A, you can ask a question at that point. And Liz will share some details on how to do that as we get to that point in the evening. So enough of the nitty gritty. Let's get to the reason why we're really here. We're here to hear from Carol about her book. Carol Newman Cronin is an author, editor, Olympian, and world champion sailor. She's an award-winning writer for boating magazines and websites and other clients as well, primarily in the marine industry. But tonight we're here to focus on another way that Carol so deftly uses her words. She writes coastal fiction, as well as true stories about boats and waterfront folks. Her descriptions of life on, near, and sometimes in the water come from her years of experience boating. A lifelong sailor, she represented the United States at the 2004 Olympics in Athens. She was a member of the US sailing team for nearly a decade, and in 2018, she skippered the winning entry at the Snipe Women's Worlds. Carol also spends lots of time on the water, including over the winter in Rhode Island. So she's dedicated on her stand-up paddleboard. And Carol and her husband Paul also spend lots of time out sailing their beloved Matsya, which is a classic wooden 1938 Herreshoff design sailboat. So all that time on the water and all those different boats really shines through in each of Carol's novels. Oliver's Surprise and Cape Cod Surprise, in which young Oliver does some storm-related time travel in southern New England, and in Game of Sails, an Olympic love story. And I'd say as far as a love story goes, there's a traditional love story involved and a love of sailing story involved, no surprise. And now tonight, we're here to celebrate the launch of her fourth novel, Ferry to Cooperation Island. Carol, congratulations on launching your Ferry.
Thanks very much, Kim. And I think you guys can all tell that we have a lot of fun sailing together, talking books together. And also Kim has had a lot of great feedback about writing and suggestions for characters that has definitely worked its way into at least 2 of my books.
Well, that's fun. Carol, I think it's time to leave the dock and get out to the race course, but let's chat a little bit, shall we? So I was lucky enough to read this book. What inspired you to write Ferry to Cooperation Island?
There were three inspirations. The first is cooperation, the second is coastline, and the third is this ferry captain that just was very persistent. And cooperation is a little bit vague, but my idea was I really wanted to write about a place where people were rewarded for working together. And the second, the coastline piece, I wanted to share with everyone the beauty of Rhode Island shoreline and how all the rocks that I see on my morning paddles and my evening sails, and it's just a beautiful place to live. And then the third was I had this ferry captain talking in my head, and that's the character that grew into James Malloy. And he was raised to be a lighthouse keeper, and he has this go-it-alone approach that works really well early on when he's trying to figure out how to keep a ferry running. But when he tries to solve larger island problems, it really gets in his way and he has to learn to work with other people. And that's a big theme on the book.
Other people. So which character came next?
Courtney came next. She was brought in as an outsider to run the ferry when James gets fired. And she was raised in Oxford, Maryland, and her dad ran the Oxford ferry. So that was a great excuse to go down and see this beauty and have a little field trip, listen in on some local accents and ride the ferry. And I also learned something about Courtney that I never would have learned if I hadn't actually been there on where she lived.
Can you let us in on that secret? What did you find out about Courtney?
Well, I was walking down the beach and I saw an oyster shell, which is not exactly a unique thing on a beach in Oxford, Maryland. I picked it up and I thought, Courtney wears an oyster shell around her neck on a leather thong. And I'm going to let you read the book to find out why that is. But that's where the inspiration came from.
Very cool. So you've got 2 beefy characters there. Who else is important to the story of Cooperation Island?
There's actually 4 other point of view characters. And the reason I wanted to structure the book that way, these stars show where they live. One lives off the island and the others all live on the island. The reason I wanted to structure the book that way is because there are things that the reader needs to know that James and Courtney don't know. And so it was really fun, the last bit of editing, piecing together all the little breadcrumbs for the reader so that you could find out exactly what you needed to know to move on to the next piece of the story.
Very neat. Well, with a bunch of stars indicating those locations, so there's James and Courtney. Who else is important to the story?
Well, the other stars indicate the point of view characters. So there's Lloyd, the bad guy who lives off the island. There's Mavis, a Narragansett Indian, and she lives on West Harbor at the west end of the island. And then the two characters in the middle are Parker Dane and Owen, the landscaper, who both live at the inn at the top of the hill.
Very interesting. So with one ferry captain there and someone else coming in on the scene, it sounds like there might be a little bit of conflict between those two characters. Would you maybe share a section with us from your book that captures that conflict?
That's great. I'm going to read just the end of chapter 2. And in chapter 1, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, we've met James, who he's sitting dockside at the coffee shop, and he's horrified because his ferry is coming in without him. And then in chapter 2, we meet Courtney, who's just docked the ferry for the first time, not perfectly, but she got it done, and has just stepped off the dock onto the dock on the island for the first time. And I'm going to breathe and speak slowly. The coffee shop was only 100 yards away, just past where wood planks ended and clamshell parking area began. But to get inside, she'd have to navigate across that crowded deck. A whole island's worth of eyes tracked her progress, and the crowd fell silent enough to hear the creak of wooden steps. "Welcome to Britain," a white-haired man called, trying to swivel around enough to smile right at her. Courtney smiled back, vaguely, at that table of 6, until she noticed the wild hair and ragged sweatshirt just to the left of the doorway. Out of uniform, face hidden behind a newspaper, the only guy sitting solo had to be Captain James Malloy. "Make friends with the old captain," her dad had said, "and your life will be much, much easier." 4 steps across the deck. Courtney ready to smile for when he dropped the paper. There wasn't room to set the heavy mail crate down on his round table, so she shifted it onto her left hip and slid her right hand out of its jacket sleeve. "Captain Malloy?" she said, reaching around the paper. "Courtney Ferris." Captain Courtney Ferris, she remembered, too late. Her heart was pounding. James kept all 10 fingers and both eyeballs locked on the news. All around her, she could feel the eyes on them, everyone waiting for him to respond. "Love to pick your brain," Courtney blundered on, bringing the mail crate back in front of her like a forward guard. "That nun off Bird Island was a bitch to find, and they make the rocks kind of hard up this way." She nodded at the other seat. "Got room? I'll grab a cuppa. Be right out." She waited. He snapped the newspaper even higher. "Say hello at least, James," someone called from the big table. When one of her passengers held open the door for her, Courtney gave up and carried the mail inside. What an ass. Her new boss was right. She'd driven her new ride right into enemy territory.
Yikes! That was an awkward first meeting. Seems like they need to get to know each other a little bit and have some conversation. Maybe answer a couple quick questions about each other. So, much like our group tonight, let's take a quick moment to learn a little bit from our fellow video sharers here. We're going to do 2 quick Zoom polls. Liz is going to post them, and they'll pop up in the middle of your screen, and all you need to do is simply click on the radio button that best describes your answer, and then the square with the poll in it will go away. We're going to do 2 quick polls. Our first poll is, do you already have a copy of Ferry to Cooperation Island, and what form is it in?
There we go. The first poll is up, and people are rapidly answering.
Wow, you guys are speedy answerers.
Lots of yeses.
So give just a moment more for a couple more folks to answer on in. And Liz, when you feel like the wave of answers has slowed down, we'll pop to the next one.
Okay, give her one more second. Oh, there's a cookie. One more. Do we have a 50? Do I hear 50? Okay, I'll end this poll now.
Okay.
And would you like the results?
Sure, what's the scoop?
Okay, so we had 43% said yes, they own the book in paperback.
Woohoo!
1% yes, they own it on the Kindle. And 10% will say no, paperback's on order. 4% are waiting to see you in person, Carol. And 27% are not yet, but maybe by the end of the evening, we'll have them convinced.
And how much is the ebook, Liz?
99 cents.
Fantastic. Okay, well, speaking of books and Carol, our second poll is which of Carol's earlier books have you read?
And here we go. Here's the second poll. Wow, lots of previous readers.
Yeah,
That's great.
how fun.
We should have added a special question for a couple people of how many people have blurbed my previous books too. There's at least
Ah,
one.
yep.
Okay, a couple more seconds and we'll get a few more answers. Okay, that looks like about it.
Very neat.
Want to save the results, or would you like to hear the results?
Oh, let's hear them.
There we go.
I'm not one for delayed gratification, so.
Yeah. No delayed penalties for you.
Right.
2% have picked up Oliver's Surprise. Not surprising there. 34% have done the Cape Cod Surprise. 36, the Love Story Game of Sales. And 32% have done No, Not Yet.
Very fun. Well, that's a lot of folks who've got some great opportunity to dive into some neat books. So speaking of neat books and neat places, we heard a little bit from Carol as she was describing the inspiration for Ferry to Cooperation Island, a little bit about Brenton Island. Carol, tell us a little bit more about that special spot.
Yeah, Brenton Island is an imaginary island. It's about 4 miles off the entrance to Narragansett Bay, right where Brenton Tower used to be, for those of you that remember that landmark. And it's quite rocky. And when I first started thinking about this island, I thought all the rocks looked the same. And what I realized was there's a lot of different textures and colors represented in Narragansett Bay by the rocks I see around me paddling and sailing. And so what I'd like to do right now, I'm going to read a very short snippet from a little later in the book when Courtney's a little more relaxed driving the Homer and she can look around a little bit more. And the idea here, while Liz is showing you pictures that I've taken, is to give you an idea of how what I see translates to what my characters see. Spring bright green grass and trees softened the island's profile above the high tide mark, but the harbor's edge was just as uninviting as ever. The first time she'd come in here, all the rocks had blended together. Now she could pick out variations in both color and texture. Gray to black, wrinkled as her grandmother's face, to smooth and shiny as the painted counter either side of the ferry's compass. Zigzags of white stitched diagonal seams right through some of the blackest rocks. Too bad she hadn't paid more attention in geology class.
They're gorgeous photos and gorgeous words. With having all that inspiration from places around you every day that you could write about, why create your own island?
Well, I originally planned to set it on an existing island, but I needed to include a few key landmarks. And one good example is the monument, which is a structure that was built by the Narragansett Indians on the southwest corner of the island. And I thought I'd created it. And then we went to Dingle, Ireland a few years later and saw this. And it was very spooky how familiar it looked, 3,000 miles away. And it's just a good example of how sometimes my imagination is inspired by something I've forgotten I've seen or who knows, maybe saw in a photo or maybe dreamed up and then saw in real life. It was really cool.
So reading through the book, I mean, there are so many details. Monument, I don't want to give any away, but how do you keep track of all those details as a writer?
Well, I actually created a chart, which was really fun, but also a really good way to make sure I maintain some consistency about how long it would take to walk from one end of the island to the other and where the houses were located. And I sort of filled it in as I added more details writing the story. It was, like I said, it was really fun to create this chart, but also brought me right back to childhood because I used to draw these, while we were cruising, I'd draw these pencil sketches with harbors and bays, and then I'd name each point and name the harbors. And I think a lot of it was as I learned words, I tried to use them. And the only example I remember specifically was Proboscis Point.
Wow, that's a wacky one. You got that one right on the nose. How old were you when you named that point of land?
Well, that's a good question. I was probably a little older than when this picture was taken at age 5, when I already apparently thought I should be in charge.
Do you know where that photo is taken?
My parents think it was in Vineyard Haven, thanks to the little spit of breakwater you can see behind it, but we're really not sure. And it's a fun memory for sure.
Very fun, very fun. Taking the wheel and not giving it up. There we go. So speaking of boats, the Brenton Island Ferry. It's an unusual boat. It's got some quirks. Is it based on a specific boat?
It was originally inspired by the Jamestown to Newport ferry, this beauty, which runs back and forth across the bay. But I needed a little bit more length overall because it was leaving the bay on a regular basis. And so I looked around and also spotted another local favorite called the Gansett, which is a little bit closer in length. And that was my primary inspiration. But the Homer has a few quirks that would never happen on an actual existing ferry. One of them is varnished wheelhouse doors, which just makes no sense at all from a maintenance standpoint, but are beautiful to look at. And the other is there's a bulkhead between the wheelhouse and the passenger area. And that was to create a private area for conversations in the wheelhouse, but again, wouldn't happen on an actual ferry. So that's the advantage of being able to design boats in Photoshop instead of in real life.
A Photoshop naval architect. So have you ever driven a ferry like any of those boats or the amalgamation thereof?
I have never driven an actual ferry, but a couple years ago, I was lucky enough to get to drive the Coastal Queen across Narragansett Bay, which is a beautiful Chesapeake boat. And it was actually, again, a little bit spooky how familiar the wheelhouse was. The varnished doors, this beautiful varnished wheel. And the biggest difference I noticed from what I imagined would be true of looking out the Homer's wheelhouse is that it was a lot higher. And this is a view that would be a lot closer to what it would look like looking out the wheelhouse of the Homer. This is actually a screenshot taken from the really nice 1-minute trailer that Paul did of the book. And if you guys haven't seen it, I'd really encourage you to go look at it because it really captures some of the beauty we see around us in Narragansett Bay and outside the bay.
Yeah, it is. It's a great trailer. It's fun to watch. It's just very soothing, and there's some boats involved. You can view that trailer on Carol's website, which is www.carolnewmancronin.com. And if you do go to see the trailer, make sure you can check out, Paul's just posted the link directly to it in the chat as well. When you get there, make sure to turn up the sound and hear the gorgeous soundtrack to go with the gorgeous images as well.
Yeah, and I do really want to thank Paul for that, for putting that together. It was really fun to work with him on that. And also, before we wrap up, finally, I really have to send a big thanks out to Kim and Liz for helping put this show together, this ferry ride together for you guys tonight, because I couldn't have done it without a couple of teammates, and I hope you really enjoyed it. And we're gonna take some Q&A now, so don't go away, but have another sip of drink, and we'll go from here. Who's in charge of this part?
I think that rolls over to me.
Okay.
Captain's in charge.
I can't hurt her.
And the cat herding's been going well, it looks like. I haven't seen any questions yet in the Zoom chat, but we'll get there. But now we'll open up the floor for some questions from all of the people in the audience. So none of these canned questions from Kim. We're going to get to the meat of the topic and the awkward ones for Carol. You can either submit a question via the chat feature, and we'll pick those up and I'll ask those questions of Carol. Or you can raise your hand in the participant window. I see a hand up already, and we'll go to that soon. And then I can call on you, and then if you'd like to ask the question yourself, I'll ask you to unmute yourself, and then you can turn your video on, and then Carol can see you and hear you ask the questions. So I see there's already a question coming up. We've got Emily Bunning in the chat room. Emily, would you like to unmute yourself? And there you go. And you can ask the question directly of Carol.
Well, Carol, hi. I have my punch here, and great presentation. You touched a little bit upon this, but what was your inspiration for Brenton Island? And what by that I mean the shape, the navigational marks, the geography. Was there something specific that you created the island from, including Bird Island, which is pretty interesting?
That's a great question, and it's an amalgamation of a lot of different islands around here, probably starting with Cuttyhunk, also incorporating, but more of a rocky island, so maybe some other aspects of Dutch Island, which isn't actually inhabited. And then for the actual chart, nobody's ever asked me this, so you're the first, but for the actual chart, I started with an outline of Nonamesset Island, and I turned it upside down so nobody would recognize it. Again, this is Photoshop. And then I had to adapt a number of things as the story came along. And so a lot of the marks would show up in the writing, and then I'd have to add them to that chart. So it was a really fun process, but not straight linear. But that's a little bit of an idea of how the evolution went.
Great.
Great, thank you, Emily. And it looks like I've got a question in the Zoom chat that I'll ask. It's from Alice Early. It says, we hear it's so important to post reviews. Where should we go do that to give where should we go to do that to give the book the best benefit?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Alice, for asking that. What I like to recommend to people is a little bit odd, but it's buy local and then post a review on Amazon. So if you're lucky enough to have an independent bookstore, please support it. Anybody who's in the Rhode Island area can find books at Island Books. They have books in stock, and there are also books downtown Jamestown now, as of yesterday, Tuesday, signed copies. But the best place to post reviews is on Amazon. And that's because it really helps the visibility of the book, and that will help the ratings and the algorithms, and then Amazon will reward that with better visibility. So it's sort of a rich get richer kind of place for that.
Love that. Thank you, Alice, for that question. And then I'm not quite sure who the name is, but it says G.W. Crook has a question in the chat room, and
that would be Gwyneth.
Gwyneth, okay. How long have you known you wanted to be a writer, and how difficult was it to break into it?
Well, that's a good question too. My grandmother was a novelist, and so growing up, I had this idea that books came from someone. They didn't just show up on the shelf. And I think that was a large part of my original inspiration. And then there was a lot of perspiration involved in actually making that into four novels. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's been great to share the stories with readers all along the way. And I think this is my best book yet, so hope to hear from you guys that you agree.
Great question. Great answer. The next one comes from someone who wants to ask their own question, and that would be Mr. Gary Jobson.
Oh.
Well, first of all, thanks for all the work that you do. My question, Carol, is how much time does it take to write this book? To get the outline and all the little subplots and then actually get it all down on paper? How long does it take?
Well, Gary, as a fellow writer, you know it takes way too long.
Right.
But you're also, you made an assumption there that I outline, and that's really not the way I write. I'd like to be more efficient about it, but it really, the characters start talking to me and these stories come up, and if I try to outline too early, they go off and do their own thing, and I guess they didn't get the outline. So that doesn't work very well for me. But I'm hoping to work in that direction with future books. I always hope to work in that direction, and then I get sidetracked. To answer your question with an actual number, I started this book in 2012, but I took a few years off. I stumbled into a real job and took about 2.5 years off from any writing of it. So it was about a 5-year project, looked at it that way.
Well, and how many words is the finished project?
94,000 and some, I think.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a stage when it was 130,000 words, and it's better.
That's a lot of cutting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
So were those extra words the ones that ended up in both of the prequels?
Some of them, yeah. Some of them were scenes that needed to get left out, and some of them were words that were either repetitious or just didn't move the story forward. And that was kind of the final part of the edits, was figuring out what really needs to be on the page for the reader to understand what's going on.
Okay, and then back to the chat, we have a question from Kate Woodworth. How many readers did you have before the book was accepted for publication?
How many readers? Oh, like first readers. Yeah, thanks, Kate, for that question. You were one of them, so it's a little bit of a loaded question. I think there were about more than 5, but less than 10 people who read the book in various formats, and I'm not double counting on a few people who read several versions like Kim, but I think that's about right. It wasn't 10, but it was definitely more than 5, and I got really valuable feedback from you, Kate, and from a bunch of other people as well.
Great. We have a question from a participant who's not identified. It just says iPad number 9. But I'll ask iPad number 9 to...
that would be Nancy Gilreath.
Okay,
Nancy.
identify yourself and then ask your question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, iPad number 9 here, Nancy Gilreath. Carol, I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit about your writing process. Do you wake up in the morning and start writing? Do you write one day and edit the next? Just tell us a little bit about how you fit it in, because we know you're doing a lot of other things at the same time that you're working on a book.
Well, thanks for the question. My best time for writing for sure is in the morning. The earlier I start, the better. And if I've had a good workout that morning, it's even better, or gotten on the water for a swim or a paddleboard. I sit down at my desk at around 8-ish, and I try to write as much as I can before noon, and by then I'm kind of petered out. And then I spend the afternoon on either more billable work or editing something that doesn't require quite as much of my creative brain. So that's the best thing around. But again, you're another linear person like Gary. It's not always that cut and dried as far as Monday through Friday. It varies from day to day, which is great. I enjoy that part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
And there's another related question, which is going about how you process your books, is when you start a book, you know how it's going to end. Sorry, that's from Nellie Walkoff.
Thank you, Nellie. And I should ask you the same thing about writing songs. I don't generally know exactly how it's going to end, but I know the ending before I know the middle. So again, it's not linear. I start with this idea, this vague idea of, oh, cooperation, island, ferry, captain, other ferry captain. And then I sort of write along, and eventually I'll figure out, oh yeah, here's the closing scene. And then I have to fill in the rest in between. So again, not an overly linear process.
This might be a loaded question coming from Sharon Bialy. Are you working on another book?
Not a loaded question. I actually have another question too.
Well, the answer is I have already started work on the sequel. which is really exciting, but it's probably going to be another few years before it's ready for you guys. And I think part of why this is such a good book is because it took me so long and it went through so many different stages of being, quote, done before it really was done. So it's going to be a while, but I'm really looking forward to continuing to write about these characters because there's plenty more going on that island.
Great, and I think Sharon has another question to follow along.
I do, thank you. I figured let's go live voice here instead of typing. So Carol, I'm wondering what authors you turn to for inspiration.
Well, that's an excellent question. So as you know, Sharon, we sort of developed this this genre called coastal fiction. And one of my favorites actually had a book out that came out on Tuesday as well, Meg Mitchell Moore. She's probably her closest book to mine is called The Islanders, and it's set on Block Island, another small town. And she chose a real island as opposed to me, but it was a really good book. And then there's a bunch of others, James Nelson for historical fiction, some older books as well, and it's just, there are lots of great books out there, but the coastal fiction is really what strikes close to my heart, is reading the books that I'd like to write.
Sounds good. Cheers to that.
Thank you. Cheers to you.
Great question and great answers, and I love that I've actually read all of the books that Carol has mentioned, so that makes me feel pretty good, but I also know that Carol is the person who recommends books for me, so that's good. So let's see, we've got one from Bernadette Brennan. Carol, I'm curious about the different personalities and their vocabulary and dialogue. None of them sound like you, speaking as your friend. How do you build these people's voices? Do you know specific people like this and take notes on how they sound and what they say?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have a fantastic answer to it because they're characters talk in my head and it sounds a little nutty, but I sometimes on my best writing days I feel like I'm transcribing rather than creating. James was that way, although he doesn't talk a lot, which made him hard to capture on the page sometimes because he's so quiet. I think that the toughest one I had was Courtney because I couldn't quite hear her accent, and that's really what inspired that trip to Oxford, which was a whole lot of fun. And it was a really funny moment where I took the ferry. I was listening around Oxford and all I was hearing was tourist accents. And there was a woman from London who was staying in the same hotel, and obviously that wasn't very useful. I got on the ferry, I talked to one of the deckhands, he was from Michigan. I got off the ferry on the other side in Bellevue and I hear these three crabbers talking. And it's a very narrow dock and we're just supposed to keep walking and walk up to the parking lot. And I just couldn't figure out a way to hang out and listen to these guys because that was the accent I was trying to capture. And what I should have done, of course, was, hit record on my phone, but I didn't think of it in time. So that's kind of a funny story about trying to hear the accents that aren't quite in my head, like that one, like Courtney's.
Great. And then let's see, we have another one in the chat from Kelly. How has your publishing experience been? Did you shop around for a traditional publisher before deciding on SWP?
Well, one of the reasons why the book went through so many iterations is originally I was going to self-publish it the way I did with Game of Sales, and because I thought it was done in the end of summer of 2017. And then I spoke to a few people and they said, you really should try to find an agent. And I thought, oh God, that's going to take a long time. I'd rather just publish it. But I'm so glad I did that. And so what I did was found an agent. It took me about a year and a couple of more drafts of the book. And I don't know if April's on the call, but thanks for your help in all this wild project. And then she suggested going right to She Writes Press as her first choice, and it's been a good experience. It's been very different from my previous to working with Trish O'Hare at Gemma Media for the first two Oliver books. I think I saw a flash of Trish on the screen, And then
You bet.
self-publishing Game of Sales was another experience. So I feel like I've kind of done it in all sorts of different ways, and there are advantages and disadvantages to all of it. But it's really exciting to be working with a press like that, who did such a beautiful job with the cover and the publication.
This must be from a question from someone who's local to Jamestown. Do you write on the porch?
Yes, I do. On a sunny day, I'll go out there. Even in February, sometimes it'll be warm enough to go out there with maybe a blanket over me, and it's just such a real treat. And I actually got caught by a friend who was walking up the street one afternoon, and it was a morning actually, and said, "Are you writing?" And I said, "Yes, I am," which was really fun because I do a lot of editing and other work out there as well, but it was fun to be asked that question at a time when I could say yes.
So the questions are slowing down in the chat room. So if anyone has one, want to put your hand up in your participants box, or if anyone wants to do a quick type or a chat, or just say, "I have one" in the chat. We'll see if some come up. But I'll ask one that's, what's next for you? Now that you've done with the launch.
Well, we have a couple of book signings coming up, which is going to be really fun. There's one that's definitely virtual on July 8th, which is being hosted by the Savoy down in Westerly, Rhode Island. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to have a conversation with my friend and fellow author, Alice Early, and we're going to talk about our books. She has a lovely book called The Moon Always Rising that I definitely recommend you guys pick up. Another piece of coastal fiction, so but set in Nevis, so a little different scene. So we're going to have a conversation and sign some books. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. It's going to be on a Zoom call, I suspect. And then we have another planned launch, planned book signing at Island Books in Middletown on the 9th of July. Not sure whether that's going to be in the store. They just opened yesterday, which was great news. So we're kind of hoping that might actually be in the store. We'll see. And then a bunch of grapes in Vineyard Haven on August 26th. And happy to come talk to book groups and maybe fill in some other gaps on that as things start to open up. So that's pretty exciting. Great question, Liz.
Great, and I know we had a couple of people on earlier from, I think, the UK who left because it was past their bedtime. So a possibility of doing a launch party or a book talk in the European time zone?
Yeah, we're starting to talk about that because I had so many people who said they wanted to come and either couldn't stay up that late. And I fully agree with that, and or just would sign on and sign off early. So I'm hoping to put together more of a book discussion rather than a launch party and have it on a more European friendly time. So hopefully a lot of people would join in, but specifically for my European friends who said they bought the book and they really wanted to be here, but it's past their bedtime.
Great, I think everyone would appreciate it. It's a good participation here, and I know looking in the chat and the Evite that there are a lot of people who wanted to, but the bedtime issue came around. So it looks like Kim Carams has a question.
Oh.
It's a question, comment, conversation, keeper goer. And it is kind of funny in our COVID-19 world how doing a launch like this, I mean, there are pros and cons, and being able to, like, I feel really lucky that I got to go to the launch party, even though I'm in Annapolis and you're up in Rhode Island. I'm sure like it would have been in Rhode Island kind of thing, but I get to be there. So there are benefits too. I just wanted to comment in that, I of course had read Oliver's Surprise. I think Oliver might be on the call. Oliver's Surprise, Cape Cod Surprise, Game of Sales. And it was really neat to see this progression in just how deep and meaty your books have become as you've really dove into it. And I remember when I read the very first, like the first version of Ferry that I read, I thought, oh, wow, this is like there was this da 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 da, and then whoop, like dang, that's a book. I remember talking to Paul and being like, wow, that's like, wow, that's wow. So and what the big leap for me, the big change that really was like, wow, this is really cool, was the character development, I think. So how did you do that? That's kind of a big ephemeral question.
Well, as I said earlier, you know, I'm thrilled that the characters don't sound like me, and I think that was one of the things about Game of Sales was there were a lot of very recognizable characters that if you know me and know especially the sailing world, you could kind of pick people out. And I had a few readers comment on, oh, I know who that really is. And I haven't heard that about Ferry, which is a real compliment in terms of these characters are really their own people. And I'm sure there's bits and pieces that have come in from various places, but they really, like I said, they started talking in my head, and they wouldn't let it go. And I'm so glad that they stuck around while I took a few years off and ignored them, because it's been a really fun project, kind of getting to know them and getting to know an island that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, they're all really unique individuals who all have really important parts in the story, and I'm excited that we'll get to hear more from them.
Me too.
Excellent. And we've got a question from Don Riley, more of a technical writing question, which is the spreadsheet about how do you keep track of the data for the story? For example, how long to walk from one end of the island to the other? Is it a writer's technique, or did you borrow it from the sailors, keeping notes on wind and different conditions in different areas?
Spreadsheet? Did you say something about spreadsheet? I did create that chart, which was a really fun way to kind of mind wander about on the island, but also a way later to keep track and be consistent about where things are and figure out, oh, well, okay, where actually is James's house and where is Courtney's house and that kind of thing. As far as spreadsheets are concerned, I do admit to having filled out a few, but very late in the process when I wanted to make sure I was consistent. And it's really a self-taught technique. I don't think I really learned it from anywhere, but it was just stuff that things like the specs for the Homer. How fast would the Homer go? So therefore, how long would it take to get from the docks in Newport out to this island 4 miles off the entrance to Narragansett Bay, depending on the weather and the currents and that kind of thing. So I did set up an official ferry schedule and some other things like that. But that's more the details kind of behind the scenes rather than the details of the story. Does that answer your question, Dawn? I'm not sure quite where you were going with that.
Yeah, I think she went off mute for a bit, or went on mute. Let's see.
Ask again if I didn't answer, if you were looking for something else. Okay, great. Thank you.
So let's see. There's a question. Sorry, I'm scrolling back. I lost one.
I thought you had a guy taking care of that stuff for you.
Yeah, there's so many questions coming in all of a sudden. There's a lot of things here. So getting back to your research on your characters and also on the other facts, Charlie Arms asks, how much time do you spend on research facts? Do you do it all yourself? Do you have a research assistant?
I do not have a research assistant, and thanks to Google, it's pretty easy to find out just about anything you want now, and with a little bit of careful screening to figure out what the real story is for conflicting facts. So that's kind of a fun part of the process, and it's funny to see what pops up sometimes for Google ads for me, because I'll research what would a rum distillery look like, and then I'll be researching diesels and what's a 453, what's the horsepower of a 453, which are the engines that are in the Homer. Another thing about the Homer, it would probably not have 2 engines, but I needed to have that for the story. So that's another example of something that I manipulated to fit the purpose of the story, which probably wouldn't take place on a real boat.
And I heard the diesel maintenance issues. You got a little assistance from someone you share your house with.
Yes, Paul was a great help on that. He's very helpful on these crazy things about, well, I'm trying to accomplish this with my story, so would this work with an engine? It's kind of a backwards way as opposed to coming in from the factual angle. Same thing, my sister, who's a doctor, helped me with the question of, I described the symptoms and asked her what the cause of them would be, and that was really helpful for one of the pieces of the story as well. So a lot of things like that, asking people strange questions, and asking Google strange questions as well.
Excellent. And then, oops, where did it go? It scrolled away. Alice Early made a comment. Thanks for the plug on her book. And she's also looking forward to appearing, in quotes, with you at various virtual events this season. It's been a joy to read and reread Ferry and development, and I think it's such a winner.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, it's going to be fun because like this call, when I first realized we're doing a virtual launch and we're not going to have a party downtown like I thought, it was very scary, the idea of standing and talking to you guys sort of as a group, even though you're all friends and very supportive. And as soon as I signed on a couple of teammates and realized that Kim could interview me, that was a lot more fun and a lot easier. And I'm looking forward to the same conversation about our books with Alice.
Excellent. I have a question from John Burnham, and I'm hoping he's going to unmute himself and turn his video camera on.
That might help.
There he is.
Hi, John.
Hey, Carol. Question. Sorry I joined late, but how hard was it to come up with a title for the book?
Oh, I think you lived through some of that with me, didn't you? So that might be a little bit of a loaded question as well. The original title, I'm not even going to tell you the original title. It was awful, and it actually sounded like a thriller. And part of the process of learning the publishing game is learning that there are certain titles and certain covers that instantly tell a reader, this is the kind of book, this is a book that I want to read, or this is a mystery, or this is a thriller, or this is a piece of coastal fiction. And so eventually I got to Ferry to Brenton. That was the title, sort of the working title. And what I realized is Brenton means a lot to people around here, but when I was sending the book out to agents, it was not very, it wasn't capturing what I was trying to capture to people outside the area. And so I changed it very late in the game to Ferry to Cooperation Island, and that instantly was I think April came back and said, this is an excellent title. And so that's been the title since she signed on as my agent and accepted the book, and it's gone right through the publishing process, which isn't always the case. And I really like it now, but it took me a while to get there.
So what is it about islands and as a common denominator in your writing?
Well, I think it's a fun way to isolate people and show maybe how they have to work together and interact. And I again I had this ferry captain talking in my head, and what's a ferry captain without a ferry? So the idea that everybody kind of lives out there and this ferry is based out there, again, may not be particularly realistic. I think in real life, a ferry that ran to an island off the coast of Newport would probably spend the night in Newport, but again, that didn't serve the story. So everybody gets stuck on the island overnight, and it leads to some good conflict.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Leads to conflict and cooperation.
Yes, yes. Good point.
Great. Just checking to see if there's anyone else with more questions. Raise your hand. Sharon has her hand up.
Thank you. So I actually, I've seen a number of Zoom launches, and this is extremely well organized, Carol, and
Oh, thank you,
very,
Sharon.
multi-layered, like you really planned and prepared. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments about that. How did you do that? What went into it? Because you even sent out that envelope, which really surprised me, with tickets to the ferry ride. And I just thought, wow, this is something special. So I'd love to hear how you orchestrated it.
Well, just so you know, on the envelopes with the ferry ticket, those went to the VIP list.
Oh, sorry.
And so for those of you who want to sign up for ferry tickets, just drop me an email and we'll make it happen. But the idea behind that was I sent out a blog saying, respond to some question I had asked and you'll be put on the VIP list, and I have no idea what that means. And so then I had to come up with what that meant after a few people responded, including you, Sharon. And so the idea was send a little bit of swag for the book, and it was fun to put those together. As far as the launch party is concerned, we have done a lot of work and planning, and again, two people it would not have happened without is Kim and Liz have been right there with me, and we've had a lot of fun preparing and working for it. It's almost as much fun as practicing for a regatta, for sure. And the three of us have sailed together and spent a lot of time together, so it was a little bit easier that way, and sort of a treat to get to spend some screen time together getting ready, and that really helped. But I think the biggest takeaway for any of the writers on the call, authors who are thinking about doing something like this, is I think initially for previous launch parties, I've started kind of in the wrong place. And for this one, I started with, what do I really want to say to people? How do I want to communicate that? And then we worked out a way to do that, as opposed to, it was very freeing, actually. Once I got over the initial being terrified of the fact that we've never done this before, it was freeing to realize that we could create whatever we wanted for the evening, and hopefully entertain some people and share some information about this book, where I've spent a lot of time the last 5 years and kind of share the world with people. And so that was the goal.
Nice.
And speaking of the world, I have a question from April asking, in what country would you like to see the book published in next? No promises, but she'll try.
April, I will leave that up to you. I think all of them is the correct answer, right? It would be really fun to have the Europeans, the non-English speakers, take it on, and Australia, of course, and New Zealand, because that would give me a good excuse to go and do a book tour there. So so wherever you think it'll sell, it would be great. That would be fun.
Great. And Dan Cooney had to leave early, but he said, congrats, Carol. Great launch. What a great word for the book and the book, for the book and the crowd. Hats off to your team. You did a fabulous job.
Great. Is it time to, have we reached the dock, or are we still idling?
We're getting close to the dock. Let me see if there's, no, I think a lot of congratulations. Nice one from Roberta and a few others. Lots of good things. Yeah. So I think I'll take this and take on the wrap. And thank you for riding with us tonight. It's been a wonderful journey. We hope you've enjoyed the experience. As you are disembarking, please do not forget to buy a book. Visit www.carolnewmancronin.com to find the links and the info about the other upcoming events Carol mentioned. Please watch your step as you depart the ferry. So now we're ready to check the fenders, dock lines, put the ferry to sleep for the night. Thanks again for riding with us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next trip to Cooperation Island.
And I just want to thank everybody, family, and everyone else who's on the call. And good night. We'll see you on the next ferry ride. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Carol.